In this video, we're going to give you the overview and recap of the book of Exodus from the Bible and how it applies to your life. Let's begin. The book of Exodus starts with the Israelites living in Egypt, where they have multiplied greatly but are subjected to harsh slavery under Pharaoh. As their suffering increases, God raises up Moses to lead them out of Egypt. Moses, initially reluctant, is called by God through a burning bush, where God reveals his name as I Am, and instructs Moses to go to Pharaoh and demand the release of the Israelites. Despite Moses' protests, God equips him with miraculous signs to convince Pharaoh, but Pharaoh's heart is hardened and he refuses to let the Israelites go. This leads to God sending 10 plagues upon Egypt, each increasing in severity, culminating in the death of Egypt's firstborn. In response, God institutes the Passover, instructing the Israelites to mark their doorposts with lamb's blood so that the angel of death will pass over them. Following the final plague, Pharaoh finally allows the Israelites to leave. The Israelites, led by Moses, embark on their journey out of Egypt. As they approach the Red Sea, Pharaoh changes his mind and sends his army after them. God parts the Red Sea, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry land, and when the Egyptians try to follow, the waters return, drowning the entire army. After escaping Egypt, the Israelites face the challenges of the desert, where they experience hunger and thirst. God provides manna from heaven for food and water from a rock to sustain them. Despite these miracles, the Israelites frequently complain and doubt God's provision. This highlights a recurring theme in the book of Exodus: trust in God's guidance and provision even in difficult times. At Mount Sinai, God establishes a covenant with the Israelites, promising to be their God and they his people if they obey his commandments. Moses ascends the mountain, where he receives the 10 commandments, which serve as the foundation of the Israelites' moral and legal code. The commandments emphasize worshiping only God, honoring family, and living in harmony with others. While Moses is on the mountain, the people become impatient and create a golden calf to worship. This act of idolatry angers God, and Moses intercedes on behalf of the people. God forgives them, but there are consequences, including a plague that strikes the people. This serves as a reminder of the dangers of turning away from God. As the Israelites continue their journey, God gives Moses further instructions on building the tabernacle, a place where God's presence will dwell among his people. The construction of the tabernacle is detailed, symbolizing God's desire to dwell with his people. The book of Exodus ends with the completion of the tabernacle, and God's glory fills it, showing his continual presence with his people. The book of Exodus is filled with powerful themes of deliverance, covenant, trust, and God's provision. The Israelites' journey from slavery to freedom parallels our own spiritual journey, seeking God's guidance, trusting his provision, and staying faithful to his promises. As we navigate challenges in our lives, Exodus encourages us to trust that God is with us, leading us toward his ultimate plan for our lives. Here are some direct quotes from Exodus and how they apply to you. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. Exodus 2:1-2. Moses' mother acts out of courage and love to protect her child. In modern life, this teaches us to stand up for what's right and protect the vulnerable, even when it requires taking risks. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. Exodus 3. God is attentive to human suffering. This reminds us that God sees and cares about our struggles, and we should also be attentive to the suffering of others and take action to help where we can. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Exodus 3:10. God calls Moses to a great mission, despite his self-doubt. This encourages us to step out of our comfort zones and take on challenges, trusting that God will guide us through difficult tasks. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Exodus 3. Moses feels unqualified for his task. Like Moses, we often feel inadequate, but this passage teaches us that God equips us for what he calls us to do, even when we don't feel ready. Then the Lord said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Exodus 3:12. God promises his presence. In modern life, we can trust that when God calls us to do something, he will not leave us alone, but will provide guidance and strength along the way. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Exodus 4:1. Moses worries about rejection. This reminds us that even when people doubt us or question our actions, we can have confidence in God's calling and truth, knowing he will provide the necessary signs. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord?" Exodus 4:11. God reminds Moses of his power over creation. In moments of self-doubt or limitation, we are reminded that God is the source of all abilities, and he is capable of using us as we are. Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." Exodus 4. Moses acknowledges his own weaknesses. In modern living, this shows us that it's okay to recognize our flaws, but we should not let them stop us from pursuing God's plan for us. The Lord said to Moses, "Take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground." Exodus 4:9. God gives Moses a sign of his power. This reminds us that God can work through us in miraculous ways, even when we feel uncertain or inadequate. Pharaoh answered, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Exodus 5:2. Pharaoh rejects God's authority. This teaches us that not everyone will respond to God's call, but we should remain faithful and trust that God's will ultimately prevail. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here, and when he does, he will drive you out completely." Exodus 11:1. God promises deliverance. In our lives, when we face opposition or struggles, this passage reminds us that God will act at the right time to bring about his plan for our lives. "The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you." The Passover marks Israel's deliverance. We can apply this to our lives by recognizing that through the blood of Jesus, we too are saved and delivered from the consequences of sin. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. God parts the Red Sea to deliver the Israelites. In times of difficulty or when we face insurmountable obstacles, this teaches us that God can make a way where there seems to be no way. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on." Exodus 4:15. God encourages action when faced with challenges. Sometimes, rather than focusing on our problems, we are called to move forward in faith, trusting that God will provide the way. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. Exodus 15, verse 22. The journey continues after their escape. In life, we must keep moving forward, trusting that God is guiding us through each phase, even when the path ahead seems uncertain. The people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Exodus 10. The Israelites grumble when they face hardship. This reminds us to maintain gratitude even when things are tough, instead of letting complaints overshadow God's blessings. The Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day." Exodus 16:4. God provides daily provision. This teaches us to trust in God for our daily needs, living in the present and not worrying about the future. Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." Exodus 14. Moses encourages the Israelites to trust God's deliverance. In difficult times, we can stand firm in our faith, knowing that God is working for our good, even when we can't see the outcome. Then the Lord spoke to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Exodus 33:11. Moses has an intimate relationship with God. This encourages us to cultivate a deep relationship with God, seeking to know Him better through prayer and reflection. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell in their midst. Exodus 25:8. God desires to dwell with His people. In modern life, we can invite God into our hearts and daily lives, seeking His presence and guidance in everything we do. Exodus teaches us lessons on obedience, trust, and God's provision. In modern life, we can apply these principles by staying faithful, trusting God's plan, and relying on His presence to guide us through challenges.